Hi, I'm Jim Taylor. Welcome to In Favor Resources and to this video teaching series entitled How to Increase Our Faith. We're endeavoring to enlarge our capacity and our ability to trust in God fully in every area of our life. I want the kind of faith that's like the Roman centurion's faith that Jesus was surprised by and bragged about. I want a faith that can look at the crippled beggar and say, "Stand up and walk," and they do. I want the kind of faith that will raise the dead and heal the sick. And so we're looking at how to increase our faith as the disciples asked Jesus to teach them. And this is video number 12. I'm going to ask you to pause and download the handout to video number 12 in this series at infavorresources.com. Because there's a large scriptural story there that's all printed out for you, and then some things that you can fill in the blanks there. So this is number 12 in this series, and for the next few, there's going to be kind of a series within the series, because this is going to be holding on to your faith for the next 4, 6, 8 videos or so, in circumstances that tend to push against trusting God, that make it difficult to hold on to your faith in these difficult times. So number 12 is, this video here is holding on to our faith in the face of death. And this can be your death. It could be somebody else's. This might be your plane is going down and everybody's screaming and panicking, or it could be you're out in a public place and all of a sudden you hear explosions or gunshots and you realize this is a terrorist attack and people are dying. Or perhaps you're just standing silently beside the grave of a family member or a friend or a child. How can we hang on to our faith? How can we hold on to it and not let go and trust God when we're looking death in the eye? Well, first of all, and if you got your handout ready there, this will be the first set of blanks. True faith is based on, it's founded on God's character, not on our circumstances. See, God's character, that's who he is and what he does, and that never changes. And our circumstances, no matter how bad they might be, because those are always changing. So what we're going through now, or we're worried about going through tomorrow, should not determine whether we trust God or not today. Now, what does this really mean? Well, in Daniel chapter 3, there's a true story, a biblical story, that illustrates this principle. So you have this, most of the story printed on your handout, and I'm going to summarize some of it and read some of it. It begins with vain King Nebuchadnezzar, who built a huge statue made of gold. I don't know if it was of himself or another god, but he required all the leaders in his empire to come and stand before it. And when the music played, they were all required to bow down and worship the image or be thrown into a fiery furnace. So you have this big crowd, huge crowd of very influential, very powerful people. And everyone obeyed the command. When the music played, they all bowed down, with the exception of 3 young men who were relocated Jews who had been promoted to high positions in the kingdom. And think about this. Everybody else went down. 3 people were still standing. There's no hiding there. Talk about looking like a sore thumb, or 3 of them. Think about the courage it took to be the only ones who didn't go along with the crowd. So the other administrators saw their act of civil disobedience, religious disobedience, and tattled on them. So in Daniel 3:14, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. I'll let this go. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace." And then, he says, with kind of a smirk, "then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand." So this was their perilous situation. Because they obeyed the one true living God, they refused to obey this offensive and sinful command, and they were threatened with death. This is no story. This happened. Their lives were at stake. So they were told, basically, if you sacrifice your principles, you can live. You can prosper. But if you don't, you will die painfully. Now, this is easy for us because we know how the story comes out. We've heard this lots of times. We admire them for their courage, but we're not standing there. Imagine they're there at the time. Their lives are at stake. Can you put yourself in that position where somebody puts a gun to your head, or somebody comes up behind you and says, give me your money or I'm going to kill you, or you're on a sinking ship and people are trampling you to try to get to safety? So this is their dilemma. Will they fold? Will they bow down? Or will they compromise by saying, well, I'm going to kneel on the outside, but on the inside, I'll still be standing up, like that means something? Will they beg for their lives, ask to be excused? No, not at all. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. That's a respectful but strong statement of their disobedience, their disagreement. They're saying, you're not the boss of us. They said, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. That's talking about God's power. And he will deliver us. Now they're talking about God's protection from your majesty's hand. And that is real faith, I think, in God's character and not their circumstances. And then the kicker is this statement. Verse 18, but even if he does not, 5 very important words. Even if he does not, even if we are not delivered, even if God does not rescue us, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. And then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with these 3 young men. Of course he was. And his attitude toward them changed. Of course it did. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. And you know what happened then, and how they were watching and they saw somebody else in there and they weren't burning up. And then in verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and he asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men we tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, certainly, your majesty. And he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. And Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace very carefully, I'm sure, and he shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Notice what he calls them. Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego obeyed. They came out of the fire. And then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the royal advisors, all those people who had bowed down just minutes or hours ago, they crowded around them. And they saw that the fire had not harmed their body, miracle number 1, nor was a hair of their heads singed, miracle number 2. Their robes were not scorched, miracle number 3, and there was no smell of fire on them, miracle number 4. You can't smoke a cigarette, but people can't, they know that a half hour later, and they didn't even smell like smoke. And then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. And these are his words. The king is saying this now. They trusted in him and defied the king's commands and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. The lesson for us is this. Write down on your handout. The 3 Hebrews trusted God no matter what. No matter what the outcome. It looked like a situation where, first of all, they would have to disobey God, or they were going to soon meet God, and there was trust here. They trusted God no matter what the outcome was. Whether we die or not, they said, we will trust you. By the way, you might want to jot down in the margin there, read Psalm 138, because it sounds like something that these young men could have said as they were going into the furnace. So they were basically saying, we believe that he can, and we hope that he will, but we'll trust him even if he does not. That's faith. That's faith that can stand in the fire. That's faith that you can hold on to even in the face of death. Now, some other examples also on your handout. Job had this kind of faith. He hung on to his faith even in the face of death. Job 13:15, after all of his hardships, he said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even in death, I'm going to believe in God. Jesus wanted Mary and Martha to have this kind of faith because he said to them at Lazarus' graveside, I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And then he asked them, do you believe this? Do you have this kind of faith at the graveside of your brother? Will you trust me? David had this kind of faith. Even in the face of death, he sang, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. It doesn't matter what's happening to me or around me. David said, Jesus said, Job said, it doesn't matter. I will not let go of my faith. They can take my life, but they can't take my faith. So, just a couple things about pressing into this. Our faith doesn't look around. Write that down in your handout. I mean, out there. We don't concentrate on the doctor's diagnosis or the results of the test. We're not only thinking about the gravestones around us in the cemetery, or we're not just considering the danger, like what's happening right now in Israel. Or our faith does not look inward either. In here, how can I get out of this? Can I work harder? Can I pray more? Can I bargain with God? What can I promise God? No, our faith is always looking upward, up there, including our circumstances, not ignoring them, but trusting God. Because the bigger God is in our minds and our hearts, the smaller death will seem in our imaginations. God is greater than any of our sorrows, any of our troubles, including death. So, two things. One word to those who are trusting God, who are facing the death of someone else. And then one word to those who are trusting God, who are facing their own death. First of all, to those who have faced the death of someone else. Someone said this, many of our troubles lose their fictitious stature when we bring them into the presence of the eternal God. They shrink when we set them in a large place. There are many anxieties that look gigantic until we set them in the holy field of prayer in the presence of the Lord. Yes, and there are other things which seem enormous and overwhelming until we set them in infinite relations. Listen to this. Sometimes a grave seems so big that it appears to fill the world. There is nothing in the world but that grave. It is not our Father's purpose that we should see our dead in cemeteries, but rather see them in the heavenly fields of the infinite love, and it is there that death loses its cold and cruel servitude. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? And now a word to those who may be facing your own death. When H.S. Laird's father, who was a Christ-loving man, lay dying, his son sat by his bedside, and he asked his father, Dad, how do you feel? And his father replied, Son, I feel like a little boy on Christmas Eve. He held on to his faith, even in the face of death. Let me read just a few lyrics from My Faith Looks Up to Thee, an old hymn. My faith looks up to thee, thou Lamb of Calvary, Savior divine. Now hear me while I pray. Take all my guilt away. Oh, let me from this day be wholly thine. May thy rich grace impart strength to my fainting heart. My zeal inspire, as thou hast died for me. Oh, may my love to thee be warm and changeless be, a living fire. While life's dark maze I tread, and griefs around me spread, be thou my guide. Bid darkness turn to day, wipe sorrow's tears away, nor let me ever stray from thee aside. And then the fourth verse. When ends life's transient dream, when death's cold, sullen stream shall over me roll. Blessed Savior, then in love, fear and distrust remove. Oh, bear me safe above, a ransomed soul. Keep the faith. Don't lose it. Don't let it go. Don't let anyone or anything steal away. Hold on to your faith, even in the face of death. Next video, holding on to our faith in times of waiting.